second lesson in Module 7, and it's all about the United States war with our neighbor to the south, Mexico. Did you guys know that we had a war with Mexico? Did you guys ever know that? We did, okay? And it was all during our time when we were trying to expand westward and open our new frontiers because God wanted us to be a coast-to-coast nation. What was that idea? The idea that God wants us to be a coast-to-coast nation and it's going to happen? Manifest destiny. Well, one of the things that was in our way was this pesky nation to the south, Mexico. And enter this man, President James K. Polk. James Knox Polk. Hostilities between the United States and Mexico had been flaring ever since we had issues with Texas and the Texas Revolution. But we could have probably resolved our issues peaceably, but James K. Polk was an extreme expansionist. He totally believed in the idea of manifest destiny. And he believed that a war with Mexico would not only bring Texas into our union, but it could also free up other territories like New Mexico, Arizona, and the golden prize of California. He wanted all of that. So, because James K. Polk really wanted possession of California, that's what he really wanted, he sends an ambassador to speak with the Mexican government. And his name is John Slidell. And that's a picture of him on the top right. That's John Slidell. He sends John Slidell because he was a Spanish speaker. He could speak Spanish. And John Slidell arrives in Mexico with directions from the President of the United States, James K. Polk, to offer Mexico money in exchange for territory in California and New Mexico. So he arrives in Mexico and they're like, hey, I want to buy some California. How do you think he is received by the Mexican government? Why would he not be received very kindly?
Because he just comes out of nowhere and is trying to make deals to take land.
How do you think our government would respond if Canada showed up and like, hey, we would love to buy Vermont from you guys. Here's a few $1 million. What would we do? We're going to laugh in their face. Can't have Vermont. It's not for sale. You see a sign that says for sale? No. John Slidell was not even received by the Mexican government. They didn't even want to hear it. They didn't even listen to it. For the same reasons why we wouldn't listen to it. Now, James K. Polk feels insulted by this. How dare those no-good Mexicans not receive my ambassador? So, he wants to try to incite the Mexican government into fighting. So, what he does is he sends troops to the banks of the Rio Grande River. This is the Rio Grande River. What's wrong with that?
He's sending American troops onto their land.
That's right. That's right. So you got Mexico, after the Texas Revolution, they think the border between Texas and Mexico is the Nueces River, right here. Well, James K. Polk is sending troops down into here. And so if you are Mexico, how might you view that?
That's some type of threat.
As an invasion. They have invaded because they don't agree on what the border is. So, Zachary Taylor is the general in charge. And General Zachary Taylor takes his brigades of troops to the Rio Grande River and just kind of waits. All right. While he's waiting there, let's get a gauge on how people feel about this war. Okay, so not everybody's overly pumped about going to war with Mexico. If you remember, James K. Polk won his election with his campaign slogan, 54-40 or fight. And that was over the Oregon Territory. People saw Mexico as a little bit different. Many Southerners were very much in favor of having a war with Mexico. Why might Southerners favor a war with Mexico?
So they could have increased farmland to boost the economy.
Okay, there we go. Because it's territory that is in the southern region, and it would be, according to that Missouri Compromise of 1820, it'd be south of that line that was drawn out, 3630, and be open to slavery. And if they could have additional slave states added, it could give them more power in the House of Representatives and the Senate. So that is why Southerners were a little more willing to have this. And that's where you enter this man named David Wilmot. David Wilmot. He creates this amendment to a bill called the Wilmot Proviso. It never becomes law. It was an amendment to a bill. But what the Wilmot Proviso says is that any land acquired from Mexico in the Mexican-American War will have slavery prohibited forever. So it would prohibit slavery in any land acquired from Mexico. How do you think Southerners are going to feel about that? That's right. So not only, this is not good. Not only are we going to go to war with another country, which is tough enough, but the results of this war prove to divide our nation between North and South as to what are we going to do with the territory acquired. Because we literally steal half of Mexico from Mexico. Like Mexico was half the size it was before the war than it was after. Okay? So, questions on the motives for war. All right, so as General Zachary Taylor positions his forces at the Rio Grande River, John C. Fremont, he was kind of on an expedition throughout California.
When you get a second, you got to come over and see these
Markers?
the fishing lures.
Oh, okay, cool, thanks. All right, so Mexico responds to Zachary Taylor's invasion by sending troops across the Rio Grande, and in a skirmish that occurred near Matamoros, Matamoros, I have it right there, near Matamoros, Mexican soldiers killed 9 American soldiers. Polk immediately goes to Congress, claiming American blood has been spilled on American soil, and you must declare war. I don't know if you guys can see this. Matamoros is right here. Do you see it? Where is Matamoros? Is there a Matamoros, Texas? Why? Because it's in Mexico. And James K. Polk says, American blood has been spilled on American soil. I don't know about that, James. It doesn't appear as though it was on American soil. And in fact, why are our soldiers in Matamoros? That's Mexico. Why are American soldiers in a foreign country? These are excellent questions. And James K. Polk says, it doesn't matter. We have 9 dead Americans. We got to go get them. And people of Mexico we're not exactly seen in high regard by the anti-Catholic, racist, white legislature of the day. And so, hey, let's go get them. Let's go get them. Okay? So, one such person who was like, hold up, James. I don't know about this American blood on American soil. Why don't you show me on a map the exact spot where American blood has been spilled? And that person was Abraham Lincoln. He was a very young representative from the state of Illinois, and he comes up with these things called the spot resolutions. Show me the spot on the map where blood has been spilled. So, James K. Polk, I don't want to say he lies, but he's not exactly the most truthful when asking for his declaration of war. The president cannot declare war. That's only something Congress can do. So he asks Congress to declare war, and the evidence that he provides asking for it, not exactly, it would have been fake news. How about that? Okay? So, there's a history of presidents not being truthful. So, the House recognized that war was necessary, and with a vote of 174 to 14, war is declared on Mexico. So, now we're at war. War has been declared. And you guys mentioned that you really hadn't heard much about this war. That's because it was a massive butt kicking. Like, there's probably, there wasn't even that many deaths on the side of America. More people died of disease than of actual fighting. Like, they get bit by mosquitoes and get malaria. More people died of that than by bullets on the American side. Okay? So, America, we literally invade Mexico. We cross the border and invade Mexico, and for about a year, we have battle after battle. And as you can see by this map, the blue dot, or the blue smudge, whatever you want to call that, represents an American victory. Almost everyone's an American victory. Very few. You got one up here in California and a Mexican victory. But America really conquers all the way down to the capital of Mexico, Mexico City. We conquered. The United States conquers it. Conquer all the way down. And the reason for that is that we have excellent military leadership. Under General Zachary Taylor, General Winfield Scott. Winfield Scott never lost a battle. And he earns these men fame. Zachary Taylor ends up running for president and winning. Winfield Scott runs and loses. But this fame that they earn here leads them to try out their hand at politics. But anyway, it lasted about a year. All the while this was going on toward the end of the war, James K. Polk had an idea. And it's a pretty strange idea. He comes up and he tries to do some diplomacy. What does the word diplomacy mean? What's diplomacy? You guys don't know what diplomacy is? Let's say Delaney just gets up and starts punching Paige in the head. And I was like, okay, now, ladies, let's use our words. That would be a diplomatic end to that. We're going to solve our problems using words as opposed to using our fists. Okay, so that's what diplomacy is. And President Polk says he's going to try to be a diplomat and use diplomacy. He's going to try to end this war with words. He does this by going and visiting a former president of Mexico named Santa Anna. Do you remember him? He was the dictator of Mexico when the Texas Revolution was going on 10 years earlier. Well, he had been removed from Mexico. They exiled him. And he was living in Cuba. And James K. Polk goes and meets with him and says that if he would help to bring an end to the war and give America what he wants and help mediate this border dispute, that Santa Anna could return to Mexico and be the president again. It's kind of a weird scheme, isn't it? So in 1847, during the war, General Winfield Scott's forces took advantage of Santa Anna's failed strategy because Santa Anna double crosses James K. Polk. He comes back to Mexico and then launches an attack against America. So he double crosses him. Unfortunately for Santa Anna, he goes up against Winfield Scott's troops, and Winfield Scott, as we know, was undefeated, and he loses. He betrays Polk. So, we win, and we win handily. And what the thing that formally brings an end to the war is called the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Everybody's going to say it with me on the count of three. 1, 2, 3. Treaty of? Oh, I'll say it again. Guadalupe Hidalgo. 1, 2, 3. Guadalupe Hidalgo. That's the treaty that ends the Mexican-American War. Treaty is just an agreement. And it happens in 1848. That is when the war comes to an end, February 2nd. This is what the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo does. It agrees, Mexico agrees, that the border between the United States and Mexico is the Rio Grande River, which is the present border today. So that border is created formally by the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. That's one thing it does. The United States was going to pay Mexico $15 million. And we're giving them $15 million for all of this land in red that you see on the screen. $15 million bucks, we get all of California, all of New Mexico, all of Nevada, all of Utah, parts of Colorado, parts of Arizona. 15 million bucks. That all used to be Mexico. We literally bought half their country for 15 million bucks. Pretty cheap. We kind of felt bad for destroying their nation. So that's really, we didn't have to give them anything because we conquered them down to their capital city. But we felt bad. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo also guarantees that the people who live there, what were they prior to the Mexican-American War? Mexicans. Now what are they? They're Americans. So the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo also promises that the people living in these territories will have the same freedoms as the rest of America. Freedom of religion, property protection. They will be given an opportunity to have a bilingual education. What does that mean? That's right. Their schools will have English and Spanish. And open borders. They will be allowed to come and go through from Mexico to America as freely as they would like. All right. So under the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, you see this tan border here. That was the border between the United States and Mexico. But that's not the border today. Today, this border is the bottom tan one. Well, how come we got this? Well, that's because of this thing called the Gadsden Purchase. 5 years after the Mexican-American War, it was 1853. And President Franklin Pierce is trying to, he's a very much of a Southern sympathizer kind of guy. And he wanted there to be a Southern route for the Transcontinental Railroad. He wanted it to go from Los Angeles all the way through Texas, all the way to like Savannah, Georgia. He wanted an eastern route or a southern route for the Transcontinental Railroad. But if we were to take it through this part, we'd have to go over some very rough terrain in the Rocky Mountains. So Franklin Pierce sends an ambassador named James Gadsden to Mexico and says, hey, we'd like to buy some land from you. What happened the last time they said no? We just stole half their nation. So what happens when James Gadsden goes and asks them to purchase some land? Don't hurt us. Take it. Whatever you want. And that's how we go to come across to get the Gadsden Purchase, which creates the current border of the lower 48 states. Okay? Presidential election, 1848. James K. Polk only serves one term. But in his one term, he gets a lot done. Expanding the entire size of the nation. This is Texas, by the way. This is what Texas used to look like. That's real, okay? Texas used to look like that. Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? All right, so the election of 1848. James K. Polk only serves one term because, like, he was bad health. Like he probably had what we would call like UC, like ulcerative colitis. You guys know what that is? Yeah. He suffered from diarrhea like multiple times a day. Poor guy. Okay, so. But in 1848, you have two guys running for president. You have Lewis Cass of the Democratic Party and General Zachary Taylor of the Whigs, who's the war hero, basically, you don't see there's no Republican Party yet. It's the party of Lincoln. They don't really get established until the 1850s. But it's a fairly close election. But ultimately, General Zachary Taylor wins. And during General Taylor's presidency, the United States undergoes an extremely radical change. And that change occurs as a result of finding a precious metal in one of our new territories, the Gold Rush, which happens in 1849. Gold is actually found in 1848, but word doesn't travel throughout America, and people don't start to stream in until 1849, and all those people are called 49ers. Was a miner, 49er. Oh, my darling, Clementine. You guys know that song, right? Okay. So, in January of 1848, James Marshall was a carpenter working on a mill here in Sutter's Mill. And while he was working on it, he just happened to discover gold at the mill. It was just kind of a chance discovery. And this gold, made people really lose their mind. It's called gold fever. Literally, people were flocking out to the west. So, all right, so, imagine Sophia. Big town, right? What we got, 3 police officers? 2? 5? Do we? Awesome. 5 police officers. And how many people live in Sophia?
Like 1,100 people.
Okay, 1,100 people. All right. Now, I want you to imagine that gold is struck in Sophia, and instead of 1,000 people living in Sophia, this time next year, 100,000 people live in Sophia. But the thing is, imagine this. Sophia is not part of a state. It's a territory that was just recently acquired out of a war that used to be part of Mexico. There's no government. So imagine what life was like there. There's no government. There's no sewage. There's no, it's just kind of a free-for-all. And everybody there is wanting to get rich quick. And you're competing with one another over valued spots to go look for gold. Do you think it was a crazy place? Think it was risky? Think it was dangerous? All of the above. And so these 49ers that went there, many were there fleeing from being criminals. Many were there like just to try to better themselves. Many of people were there as immigrants. You saw an insane amount of increase in Chinese immigration. You saw people there from South America. There were Native Americans. There were freed blacks. People were there from all over the world to try to get rich quick. And there were some miners that did get rich. Some miners got rich. But who are the ones that really got rich? The people that open the restaurants, the people that are selling the shovels and the picks, the people that are doing the laundry. All of the infrastructure that was surrounding to support the gold miners. That is who got rich. One guy was a German immigrant, and he saw a need that the miners needed a tough, durable pant to wear. And his name was Levi Strauss. You ever heard of him?
Yeah.
You guys are probably wearing one of his inventions right now. Blue jeans, invented for the gold miners during the California Gold Rush. Levi Strauss. Okay, so not only did the gold rush bring thousands of people to California, but it totally transformed California's economy. The exploding population created a demand for jobs. Innkeepers, grocers, bankers, carpenters, blacksmiths, police officers, all kind of workers were needed. Even women could get involved. Many women found that they could charge miners very high prices for household services, because a lot of miners came to California but did not bring their families with them. But they still needed to have their clothes laundered and clothes mended, dinner made for them. They still needed those things, and many women that were in the area decided they could fill that role. They might charge $5 or $10, $8 for washing, to provide a meal and washing some clothes for a man, and they could make good money doing that. So many even started their own businesses. Many women went into business for themselves, opening boarding houses and restaurants. And this marked one of the first times that women had that opportunity to do so in the United States. All right, so obviously the influx of all these people is going to create a great amount of diversity. What does the word diversity mean? Variety in people, okay? So within 1 year of the gold rush starting, California was the most diverse place on earth. The most diverse place on earth. It had almost every race, religion, and ethnic background represented within its borders. The growing population included large numbers of Mexicans, but Chinese immigrants escaping famine, economic hardship in China were about 1/5 of the entire population. So about 20% of the population were Chinese immigrants. And many of the Chinese came to search for gold, but some started businesses like stores, laundries, hotels, and they made some wealth doing that. But pretty soon these Chinese discovered that they and their culture were not always welcome. Why? Why were the Chinese not welcome? Racism. They had different religion, and they were not white. So that's all it was. And they faced persecution as a result of this. Like, it was Chinese men would wear long hair in a braid. Okay, and that was what they wore. It was a proud thing for them. It was almost like a religious ritual to have this long hair. Some of the miners would would bully these Chinese immigrants and slice their hair off and beat them up, and this was very hurtful to the Chinese immigrants. They were often targets of very violent attacks. There was even laws eventually made against the Chinese to prevent their immigration, and mainly all just because of racism and fear of immigrants. Free blacks also came to California, and many struck it rich. By 1855, the wealthiest African Americans in America were living in California. But even in California, free African Americans did not enjoy the same rights as whites. Barred from testifying in court, not allowed to send their children to public school, had to fight for suffrage and equal rights. And in California, there was even some slaves. There were still people brought their slaves with them to mine the gold. And it's just another sore point to drive a wedge even further between Northerners and Southerners. But even though California was part of Mexico in 1848, it became the gold rush started in 1849. It became a state in 1850. And the Constitution of California banned slavery. So it became a state in 1850, which is very fast. Very fast. Okay? Questions on the stuff we talked about? Anybody ever been to California? It's the Golden State. All right.